Hello there, Sir from 17 once again. This is my Titanfall 2 Master Difficulty Movement walkthrough. This is the third stage of the game. It's called Into the Abyss, and we're coming up across a common enemy in this particular run, which is any wall that looks like it belongs on crash site is notoriously difficult to wall run on. And I don't know why. Titanfall is this interesting game in as much that they have surfaces that look like you shouldn't be able to run on them, like curved surfaces and weird like oblique angular stuff, and you still kinda can in a lot of cases. They have moments where there are pieces of geometry that look like you should hit them as you would a tree in a GTA game when you're in a car, but you go straight through them as if no collision was ever on them. There are all these wonderful concessions that they've made to maximise mobility, movement and speed, so that the player can have a lot of fun with these marvellous tools. And then every so often you just get this big cock slap to the face where the game's like, nah, you can't come this way, sorry. And it's so strange, but I'm bunny hopping down this corridor, using the air strafing. I'm rocking the car submachine gun, one of the most powerful weapons on the multiplayer on PC. Really, really good on console, but not quite as dominant as the auto-aim magicians that are the assault rifles. I get a little bit frustrated there at that thing that's carrying a tree as I bunny hop into it and I can't get around it, and it kills my momentum. And then we can run into a couple of grunts now and start shooting them. So, in a perfect world on the frontier, I would love to be able to do this next sequence outside of BT, because it's a bunch of titans that you get to fight that are backed up with both stalkers, grunts, and just a really nice veritable bounty of things to shoot and attack. And I recently streamed this part of the game on my PC run when I was using mouse and keyboard, and because I was on regular, I was able to be outside of the Titan. But even then, folks, even on regular, the Titans one-shot kill you if they punch you, and they always try to punch up close, and if they aimbot you, which they can even do on easy, it's a one-hit kill. Like, you are instantly dead. It's the game's way of reinforcing that Titans are a threat. They are a big thing, and they need to be respected. And I completely agree with this, and I like it, but for the purposes of fun gameplay, it really gets in the way of, for instance, what I'm doing right now. This idea of trying to be a pilot against all odds, it's just something that's really unrealistic. And I would love to take them on as a pilot, rodeoing them, perhaps having an option for an anti-Titan weapon or something, and just have a ton of fun with that. But it's really challenging to do it on Master, which is something you're finding out right now. There's a lot of enemies here, so to be sticking on the walls and to be doing all fancy movements and killing them is kind of really tough to do. Right now I'm getting lucky because nobody's hitting me because they're distracted by BT, but if they weren't, you would see the aimbot in fierce effect. So I'm going to jump back over here, get inside BT, and we're going to push forward. And the lesser known reason for why I've also gone back into BT here is, do you see this avenue I'm on right then? BT died so many times when I was outside of him because he would stand in that area and get killed by that crane that's moving objects through the environment, and it's a one-touch kill. So I would be in this corridor, working my balls off, trying to do these crazy jumping, like Mozambique shots on everybody while trying not to instantly die. And it'd just fail me because BT died. So you have to kind of incentivize him to move, because if you don't, that will kill him, that thing you just saw then. It's really interesting. And it brings me on to a topic that I'd like to discuss about the idea of perhaps having a score mode, or some kind of interesting replay value for the campaign. So I think we can all agree, right, that Titanfall 2 has a fantastic campaign, a surprising campaign, nothing like what we expected. This idea of introducing these fun new gimmick mechanics every level, and then just as we start to get used to them and think they're really awesome, it moves on to something else, and it's this constantly evolving, shifting play experience. We were expecting Call of Duty with robots, we got everything, a little slice of all kinds of game styles, and it was really, really fun. It was nice and short, so it's short and sweet, not overstaying its welcome. But there are people like me who, I like replaying campaigns, I like having a reason to do the one-player stuff. And one of the weaknesses of Titanfall 2 is that it is a multiplayer game, let's face it. People want you in the multiplayer. I love the multiplayer, but there are times when the multiplayer can be frustrating. There are times when you don't have enough time to invest to actually do a multiplayer session. There are a whole host of times when things get in the way. So you just want to jump on and play for maybe 10 minutes or 20 minutes, and you don't have time to, matchmake, maybe your internet's down, whatever reason it is. It's great to have alternative ways of playing, and at the end of the day, we just want more of Titanfall, you know? We want to play these fantastic systems and use them in a manner that's not necessarily for everybody, but is for some folks. Well, having some kind of score mode in the campaign, I think, would be a really, really good way of remedying that. I think it'd be interesting if they introduce some form of modified version of the game. Perhaps a mode, like an arcade mode, where instead of doing a lot of the downtime moments where there's a lot of talking and plot and there's not any action, imagine if there was a mode where it just chained every gunfight together, and in those gunfights you were rewarded for doing very specific types of actions. They could even have it so that they change the spawns for what are in the environments. So you might be used to this area having a bunch of stalkers, some grunts, and then some of those titans with the quad launcher, the brutes I think they're called, which are just essentially Strider class titans with the quad launcher. But if you come here and you play it on that specific mode, every time you play it it's a little bit different. Maybe there's Scorch Titans, maybe there's no Titans and it's just a ton of Spectres. You know, just an interesting way of reintroducing elements that make the gameplay feel fun, to let people have a different way of playing it. You know, you could have the option of completely removing your Titan and having to do it as a pilot, but just make the aim of the other Titans not completely god tier on every difficulty where they murder you immediately, and have it so that it's, you know, an extra level of challenge. Or you could even have the scoring system benefiting you playing in a very specific way. Like, there are all kinds of fun stuff you can do with this game where you'll see a Spectre firing an MGL at you, you can use the Vortex Shield to catch his MGL grenades and then fire them at a Titan. Imagine getting bonus points for doing that. Bonus points for rodeoing Titans, because it's really dangerous. You know, bonus points for killing them outside of your Titan. Points for using the mobility, getting kills while being mobile. You know, all kinds of interesting things. Giving a friendly Titan a battery and helping him. You know, things that you do in the multiplayer without thinking that never translated to the campaign because it's also, you know, solo-centric or player-centric. Just an opportunity to take these wonderful systems and do something interesting with them. And this is me just, you know, pissing in the wind right now, coming up with things off the top of my head. But you could really go into detail here and think of some awesome things that would benefit the game. And the only problem with it is, of course, is the production time for this kind of stuff is money. Time is money. And they might not have the money to be able to do that because, you know, they might be focusing on something else. They might be trying to, you know, refine the multiplayer or whatever. But I don't really see them doing too much with the multiplayer. And I know it sounds kind of harsh, but we've been waiting months for patches to melee, which is completely preposterous when it lunges 30 feet and kills you instantly. You know, we've been waiting for them to tone all kinds of things down and buff all kinds of things. Like, how long have people wanted Scorch to have something to make him more viable against the other Titans? They've nerfed Tone like 50 times, and she's in a good place now, but it took ages for him to get there. There are all these things that the game has issues with, like the servers at the moment, the connection, you know, the tick rate being 20 instead of 60. You know, all these things that they could have worked towards or they could have put money into, and instead they gave us fucking cosmetic garbage skins. And I don't want to be, you know, the guy that shits all over Respawn, because I think they did a fantastic job, and I know it's way harder than us as a consumer believe it to be to get things to be done in video games. But at the same time, I just kind of feel like they've focused on some of the wrong areas for me personally, and for a lot of people, I think. And you can't please everybody, and nor should you try. But I still get the feeling like, oh, that was a bad jump. Do it again, Chris. There you go. Much better. As BT gets captured and taken away here. But I really feel like they could have perhaps gone a different way with it, and I would love to be a fly on the wall to understand some of the choices, because it's easy to demonize things and vilify it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case. Oh, watch this, by the way, guys. You can get some awesome speed if you jump off this elevator. The problem with this part, I could not get it so that I could kill everybody without dying. They've all got light machine guns or something, and they kill you insanely quickly, and mastiffs, and it's really, really dangerous on Master. So you'll notice I'm using a bit of the old MGL here, which is not really a gun for this distance or for these enemies, but it's fun to use. And then I'm going to be going back to hopefully using the Ava, because I really love this gun. I really do. There's something beautiful about shotgunning people in this game. Look at that. So beautiful. It's such a fun game, guys. I recommend you pick it up. It's always on sale. It's really worth playing. It's just fantastic. But it would be nice if they could, you know, bring something new to us instead of retreading the steps. And one thing that I heard the other day which I thought was really interesting, and I don't know the validity of this because I heard it in a Twitch stream, and that's kind of like saying, you know, when I was in Tibet, it doesn't really mean anything, does it? You can say anything after that because it's one of those weird things people say. Speaking as a mother, because queefing out a human being gives you some kind of insight into the, you know, socio-political sciences, whatever. But I heard that apparently Respawn had a lot more original content planned for Titanfall 2 as far as maps go, but then they heard the big backlash about everybody not liking the new direction the maps have took, so that's why there's been more remade Titanfall 1 maps than Titanfall 2. And what this does for me personally is it puts me in this really weird headspace. On the one hand, it's like, I think the maps in Titanfall 2 are fine. There's a couple that I infinitely dislike, but for the most, I think they function just fine. I've had a lot of fun on them, I'm going to continue to do so. Is there a disparity between the first game and the second game in design? Definitely. But that's just because the games play slightly differently. It's undoubtedly Titanfall, but it's a different flavour of it. And the different flavour is reflected in the map design. There are still great maps there, but there is a definite distinction between design philosophy in the first game and the second. I made a video recently where I was discussing the visual aesthetic differences, and a lot of that is translated into just the flow of the maps as well. I didn't want to get into that because it's a completely different topic in my opinion, but it all kind of carries this truth of Titanfall 2 being different to Titanfall 1. And on the one hand, I can understand them wanting to go with what the community says. Oh, by the way, guys, if you're wondering why the crossfades are all going nuts here, the checkpoints on this level are completely out of control. You will get checkpoints in places you were never even stood, and linking footage up is a goddamn nightmare, so you'll notice that I'm just kind of trying to put them where they were, and it's a lot harder to do than you would think. Because this is master difficulty. When you're trying to go fast like I'm doing like this, all it takes is a couple shots on target and you are dead, and they all have aimbot. You see what I mean? Like, you can't even contend. And then you put back into the world, and you're nowhere near where you died. You're nowhere near where you went, and you just kind of want to rely on using your cloak and using your bouncers and hoping you don't die. The strategy here is not so much great when it comes to getting through the game. This is more of a case of showing you that it can be done. And that's kind of what this walkthrough is about. Personally, I recommend taking this a little bit slower, because you'll have a lot more success, but this is meant to be a walkthrough where I'm a pilot, where I'm using mobility, where I'm doing things that you don't necessarily do in this game, like getting a nice movement boost off of that raising platform. How beautiful was that? How crazy was that moon bounce just then? And then we can cloak as we get over here, and then prepare to nearly get killed, because for some reason they're really good at shooting you when you're on this bit. Very dangerous. Aimbot gods. But back to the topic anyway. This idea that Respawn would go against their design vision for the game because of fan feedback sounds kind of bullshit to me. Oh, there's a nice little sequence break that I'm going to show you here, guys. If you jump on this particular piece of platform when it moves a certain way, you can get this really ridiculous bounce over here, or you can wall run with good timing and do that. And now you've skipped that entire sequence that was just in that left-hand side, that big gunfight against all those people, and you're on the next part of the game. But you have to be careful here once again, because when this starts speeding up, if you jump when it speeds up, it gives you so much momentum that you will fly off this platform and die. I do it all the time when I'm trying to mess about, because I like moving, and sometimes it definitely bites you in the bum, so be very careful with mobility. And then we're just going to hop over here, skip that sequence, and then get into this house, and this house is going to take us to where we need to go. Because this level is essentially an auto-scroller, and all you need to do is hit the correct triggers and the game will scroll you to the next place, and we just got rid of all those encounters and pushed forward effortlessly. Job's a good one, right? But to me, a developer cannot give in to the peer pressures of its community. I can understand making slight concessions so that you can try and please everybody, but they obviously had a very distinct vision for the map design in this game, and it is a different decision than the first game. Oh, be careful doing what I'm doing now. This is me just being silly because I like to mess about, but if you climb on top of the railing above me and you run on there, every so often you'll just hit a kill box. There's a weird kill box that's on top of that thing. I don't know where it comes from. I thought I was being crushed, but I wasn't, because I've died just running with nothing around me. There's a couple of weird properties up here, so be very careful if you want to go and sit up there like I just did. That's the reason I'm coming down, because I fell off there a million times and got killed by all kinds of weird things. But it's nice to know you can go up there. But they've committed to this visual style, so if it's got any kind of credence, this statement that they've gone against their own intentions and their own creations to try and please people because of the backlash, I think that's a fundamental failure. Because in my eyes, a creative risk is 100% about integrity. You acknowledge that you're making a risk, you acknowledge it's not a popular decision, you acknowledge that's what you did and that's what you stick to. You can't just go against it because it completely undercuts what you were trying to do. Remember Metal Gear Solid 2, where all the trailers were showing off Solid Snake because that's the character we were all familiar with? and then 20 minutes into that game you play as someone else and everybody got pissed off. People to this day are still pissed off about that decision. But that decision was what made that game in a lot of ways. One of the most iconic parts about Metal Gear Solid 2 is you don't play as Snake. You get to see him from a different perspective. And there is a quality to sticking to your convictions. And I hope that this is just some bullshit from a stream like it sounds like. But if it isn't, I find it really bizarre that they would go against themselves, like openly go against themselves just because the vocal majority didn't like what they did. But it's like, how many people don't like change? How many people immediately get triggered by things when they're not the same? I know I do, and we say things that we don't necessarily mean because we're in that gut reaction of it, aren't we? We don't like the new direction, it doesn't feel right, it feels wrong. We feel like we're losing a part of something we loved, so our immediate reaction is this negativity, it's this, we lash out, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad or wrong, it just means it's different, and sometimes we're just not in the right headspace to see the change. And I, for one, was not one of those people because I never had the frame of reference. I'm not a Titanfall 1 player. I am now, but that's because of Titanfall 2. This is funny. I thought I was going to die just then. And then boom, I land on that roof. How lucky is that? So, you don't have to do anything up in this room, you can just run around it or just stand still. But because I want to show off the movement and have fun, I ended up nearly dying a lot, so enjoy my stupidity. But it's great practice, this. If you want to get better at the movement, this is the best kind of practice. Because you're playing the campaign, you're at no risk of letting down your team, you're at no risk of embarrassing yourself if that matters to you when you play online. You're just shooting against the bots, man. You're just moving through a scripted environment and you get to practice this. Doing your air strafes, controlling yourself in midair, doing your bunny hops, chaining your wall runs, getting those perfect wall kicks, doing whatever it is that you want to improve. It's a great way of doing it. And another thing I heard as well, from the Ask Me Anything on the Titanfall Reddit. I'm not a Reddit guy, I never will be. Personally, I think 90% of Reddit is whiny scrubs, but that's just my opinion, and like arseholes, we've all got one. But I saw that there was an Ask Me Anything from the developers, and they were being really, really honest and replying a ton. So I'm like, this is cool, maybe somebody's going to ask some great things. And of course you get a bunch of people talking about, why do the Spectres have blue eyes? Like, oh dude, of all the things you could ask, there's always that one guy. But it's cool that somebody cares that much to ask about the lore and the fiction and everything. But I didn't give a fuck. I'm like, guys, why is the tick rate so shitty? Why do I die in cover? Why won't you improve it? Please tell me. Like, I want to know 1,000,001 things that I find to be fascinating, but people were asking crazy questions. But one thing sounded awesome. So somebody mentioned the idea of maybe time trials or some kind of, I think, single-player mobility to encourage people to move in the game, which is a really good idea, if you ask me. One of the failings of Titanfall is that the movement is presented, but never really shown to be as iconic and necessary as it is. So a lot of people go, oh yeah, that's cool, and then they never use it. And that's the reason why a lot of people are frustrated with the multiplayer, because it's a bunch of people running around with cloak and assault rifles shooting you from the floor. You know, head clipping like it's Call of Duty, all those normal grievances are coming to light because they've never realised there's other ways to play. Apparently, when the game was in development, they had this idea, and they had this actual program set into the game called, I forget the name of it, but it was some kind of infinite runner. And the idea of it was, you were in a simulation, and platforms were in front of you, and they would generate as you moved. And they generated just in front of you, so you had to react and you had to adapt. And what would happen is the longer you survived, the harder it got to progress. And it was this idea of gradually teaching people through a nice little minigame how to use the movement, how to wall run, how to double jump, how to do all that kind of, fun mechanics. And I think that sounds absolutely amazing. But for whatever reason, it never made it into the full game, so maybe it's part of the DLC cycle at some point, that would be great. But just the idea of that is awesome, because not only are you teaching people without realising you're teaching them, but you're giving them a distraction and something to improve on. And they can build on this in so many ways. You could have orbs, or those targets at the very beginning that you test your gun on? You could have those moving while you're doing the mobility to make you practice your aim. And then as you got further on the levels, or you did the harder difficulties, those targets could have more HP, so instead of just shooting them once and getting rid of them, you have to track them. And all the time you're wall running to get further on this level, you're jumping, you're being evasive, you're in midair, and now you're learning to track and shoot while doing all of these things. You're building these skills that people don't have, especially on console. Console is a nightmare for it. Like, it doesn't even play like Titanfall half the time when you play on console, because everybody plays it in such a very limited way, and you're essentially not using half the tools the game presents you with, which is really sad to somebody who respects and loves the game. And these people probably respect and love the game. They just are ignorant to what is possible in it. And ignorance is something that is not inherently bad, as long as you're willing to change it, as long as you're willing to challenge it and improve. And that mode sounded fantastic to me, and it leads into that extension of the thing that I would personally like, which is the idea of being able to have AI pilots who are acrobatic, who can do the bunny hops, who can airstrafe and move ridiculously. Because that would enable you to be able to practice this part of Titanfall that you run into so infrequently. Like, how many times have you dominated in a match of multiplayer? Because it was just a bunch of people camping roofs, or a bunch of people that you managed to get a good drop on because they were sprinting, you know, through the buildings and stuff. And you're doing all the crazy wall stuff, being mobile, being Frothy Omen or whoever you watch for great mobility, just destroying the game and feeling great. And then in the next match, you get somebody who can move, and the moment you meet somebody doing the same thing as you in the air, it goes into that wild, frenetic gunfight because you're not used to having it, because it never happens. So you get into these really cool, amazing, high-flying encounters, but you never play your best because you're so unused to having to do it. So when it happens, your blood gets going, your adrenaline gets going, it feels amazing, and then you're like, oh my god, I suck, because I'm so not practiced at this part of the game. And now imagine if all of the game was like that. Just imagine how good you could get, how good your aim could be, how well you could track while moving. How you'll never use the carbine ever again because you can't do wall running and jumping shooting with it very accurately because it's an assault rifle. You know, like, it'd change just the flow of a lot of the levels, and a lot of those levels, and the multiplayer especially, that go to time limits that, you know, are the most boring levels where somebody has 6 Titans sitting at the back of the map doing nothing. That probably wouldn't happen. Because I think fundamentally, the reason why a lot of people do play this game so passively and don't move is because they can't aim when they move, because it's hard. And things that are hard are easy to shy away from, and the easy things are the things that people want, because if they see success, that's what they want, you know? They want the easiest option, they want the path of least resistance. It's just the common denominator of our species. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I think, on part of a developer, it's a developer's responsibility to help players aspire to be better, to challenge players to improve. And there are a lot of games that I think have fundamentally failed with this. Like, you know how Call of Duty 4, the 2 weapons that you started with were probably the best weapons in the game. So everything after that was just a different flavour of the same level of success. In a less interesting game, that wouldn't have worked. But in COD 4 it worked because all the guns were generally viable. It's just the M16... Oh my goodness, the M16. People are only realising just how good the M16 are now because they weren't there back in 2007. But the M16 is a monster gun. The MP5 is a monster gun. All of the guns were great. But because those starting guns were so good, nobody changed. Nobody tried the other stuff. It leads to a stagnation in creativity. And all first-person shooters have this. It's nothing that's inherently a direct fault. It's just the idea that there aren't really specialties anymore in games, there are just jack-of-all-trades. You notice how snipers used to be a very situational weapon, whereas now they're just something that 14-year-olds run around with their squeaky voices, quickscoping and search and destroy, ruining it for everybody? That kind of mentality, you know, it's this interesting thing where Titanfall 1 was a great example of this. The carbine in Titanfall 1 was so accurate and so good at almost every distance and every utility you could imagine, that there were people that played that entire game using only that weapon. And there's nothing wrong with that in the grand scheme of things, but do you think Respawn made all those weapons so that everybody would use the same one? Probably not. But it's the responsibility of the dev to make people choose differently, to incite them to have these optional strategies and techniques. And it's the same when it comes to practicing and training. The gauntlet at the beginning of Titanfall 2 is not good enough at what it does. The movement tutorial at the beginning of Titanfall 1, whilst slightly more in depth than the second game, is not good enough to really showcase what is capable with the game. And what this leads to is, instead of having these tutorials, these trials, these these time trials, these skill-based opportunities to practice and understand these advanced mechanics, instead you get nothing. You get destroyed by that one guy who you think's cheating because he can fly, you know? You just get really disenfranchised and demoralized by getting stomped by people who know how to do these things and can still aim when they do it. So you're looking, trying to track them, but they're moving so fast you can't do it. And you're just eating deaths and deaths and deaths and deaths. Not necessarily your fault, though. It's just that you aren't aware of what is capable. And that's why I think that we need to put more emphasis on practice and on game modes that enable people to understand the systems better, because as it stands, it's the streamers and the YouTubers' job at this moment, it seems, to educate people on just what they're missing out on. How many people listening to this video have seen a Frothy Omen video, and because of watching that video you learnt something about the game and it made you a better player? Probably a lot, right, if you're a Titanfall guy and you love it, because he's one of the biggest dudes who makes videos for it, and he's one of the best players who gives us an insight and tells us about the game. Oh, by the way, guys, if you use Scorch against Ashe and she stands in the Thermite, this is the quickest boss in the game. If she comes close, just use the shield and then execute her. It's absolutely brutal how quickly she goes down when you use that. I had no idea when I first played this game. Incredibly powerful. But there is this idea that you have to autodidactically learn things about games, and I love that, because that's the way I learn. I Google, I use forums, and then I sit down and I practice and I scrim and I scrim and I scrim, and eventually I get better. That's how I study, that's how I learn. But not everybody can do that, and not everybody knows to do that. Some people might find it too difficult. They might not have the drive, they might not have the experience to know how to push themselves in that manner. And I don't think it should be the community's responsibility to aspire to be better. I think there should be enough incentive in the game to make you want to do that, because not everybody's going to want to. Not everybody is like somebody like myself, somebody like Frothy Omen, maybe somebody like you. Some people need pushing, and they need it spelled out in front of them so they can understand it in their own way. And if by making this video and showing you that this game can be played in a more interesting manner has somehow driven you to perhaps maybe increase your mobility, do more wall running, be more evasive, be more airborne, even learn the bunny hopping and the strafing on a controller, which is just cramping your hands waiting to happen, then touche to you, because you're a rare commodity now, and it's a shame. But thank you for watching, and you take care.